But I wanted to get to this one because it's so important. We've been talking about the International Intelligence Organization that really runs the black ops worldwide. And I had this caller in earlier in the week, Glenn Beck worshiping, and I was trying to explain to him why 9/11 truth is so important and the intelligence ties of the hijackers and how Al-Qaeda in many cases is funded by the Pakistani ISI and that we facilitate that through Saudi Arabia. Well, I got two stories right here that continue to back up what I'm saying. High-ranking Pakistani officials were behind the killing of 11 French shipbuilding engineers in Karachi 7 years ago. 2 French judges have ruled. Okay, this is back in 2002 when Al-Qaeda was the enemy. Guess who they blamed it on? Until now, Al-Qaeda had been blamed for the bomb attack on a bus in 2002 that killed 11 engineers and 3 Pakistanis. So up until today, when our gods in the mainstream media reported this, if I had said, no, that 2002 attack looks like Pakistani ISI ops, you're a nutball, Jason. You're crazy. Yet it happens time and time and time and time again. According to media reports, the French Secret Service retaliated after the 2002 attack, breaking the legs of 2 Pakistani Navy admirals and killing a lower-ranking officer. So the insiders know it's bull. The insiders know it's garbage. The insiders know it's intelligence operations. But who does it benefit when they blame it on Al-Qaeda? It benefits all their little black ops. And then they can do this little retaliation behind the scenes. So how does Saudi Arabia play into it? Well, more documents have been released that back the Saudi link to quote-unquote extremists. Remember, they're not terrorists anymore. They want to make everybody into a terrorist, into an extremist, blur the language. Documents gathered by lawyers for the families of September 11th victims provide new evidence of extensive financial support for Al-Qaeda and other extremist groups by members of the Saudi royal family. But the material may never find its way into a courtroom because of legal and diplomatic obstacles. Really? So wait, you're telling me that we funneled some of the hijackers through Pakistan, or through Saudi Arabia? Geez, we go over that in Fabled Enemies. Oh, and that they got funded through Saudi Arabia, but we never went to Saudi Arabia. Iraq is the enemy, and Bin Laden must be hiding in Afghanistan or our ally Pakistan, right? Huh? Kinda? Oh, wait, most people took the hush money, so now we get an occasional article about this, and everybody just backs off. It doesn't matter that I have Bob Graham in my film Fabled Enemies, again, admitting that foreign governments, that's plural, that's more than one. Yes, more than one. I'm talking to you like a child because you need to be talked to like a child if you believe otherwise. Do you understand? Other governments were involved in 9/11 according to Bob Graham, who headed up the initial congressional investigation into it. And he's no friend to you. He's having breakfast with the head of the Pakistani ISI on the morning of the attacks, and he's the main funder. And he won't, you think he's helping you? Where is he to man up and tell the truth, to come out and say what really happened? Instead, he gives you these little tidbits, this little rabbit trail to go follow. Meanwhile, we're almost 8 years out. It's almost the 8th anniversary of 9/11. We need the truth now. We can't wait any longer. It's disgusting. The money situation, I talked about this really briefly yesterday, the bill that gave another $106 billion towards the operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I wasn't sure, but I said, these are probably SDR units. Well, they're worse. They're another new form of international currency. What are they calling these ones? The president's insistence of including an additional $108 billion in asset exchange with the International Monetary Fund is merely buying global oppression. That's exactly what this is. Let's see. He's calling it an international bailout, and $5 billion of it officially is in SDR units. However, they've got another thing. It's some kind of a borrowing agreement that we're making now with the IMF. It's just lovely. And then we've got China saying we want major reserve currencies. Let's get rid of the dollar. One of the lessons that the global financial crisis has taught the world is that the top reserve currency should be kept stable. The top reserve currencies. Remember when it was the dollar was the main reserve currency? It's not anymore. This is a bankster takeover. When you put the Federal Reserve in charge of oversight, when they're the problem, I mean, the populace has lost it. They have no idea what's about to come down on them. But Ron Paul is trying to warn people. I thank you for the call, Mark. Let me just read this one off Raw Story. Ron Paul, the popular Republican congressman from Texas, is ripping into the president and Congress for what he sees as their goal with round after round of stimulus. Complete economic collapse. Let me say it again. Complete economic collapse. And Jones and others have had Bob Chapman on. They say they're about to have a bankster holiday. From their spending habits, an economic collapse seems to be the goal of Congress and the administration, he said in his June 22nd, 2009 weekly address. We just gave an additional $106 billion in military operations to Afghanistan and Iraq, among other unrelated items. Remember, none of those are shutting down Guantanamo Bay, by the way. You know, you would not have to allocate $1 billion to shut down Guantanamo Bay. I promise you that. We're actually voting in favor of wars, not just authorizing the president's agenda. The president's insistence on including an additional $108 billion in asset exchange with the International Monetary Fund is merely buying global oppression. Paul added that this bill sent $660 million to Gaza, $555 million to Israel, $310 million to Egypt, $300 million to Jordan, and $420 million to Mexico. To Mexico, this bill. We're sending almost $500 million to Mexico to fight the war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq. Do you understand? And some $889 million will be sent to the United States for United Nations for so-called peacekeeping missions. So almost $1 billion to the UN as well. In other words, the latest U.S. war funding was an international bailout. The legislation's provision for the IMF include $100 billion for the new arrangements to borrow. That's what they're calling it. New arrangements to borrow, or NAB. It's a credit instrument providing the multilateral institution with additional resources to deal with exceptional risk and stability of the international monetary system. So now they're calling it new arrangements to borrow. SDR units, new arrangements to borrow, death of the dollar. Dollar's not the reserve currency anymore. It's out. They're cutting it out. Brazil, Russia, India, and China are meeting. And they're talking about how they want a separate reserve currency. They're calling for global governance. Zach in New York, you're on the line. Yes, Zach.
That's brutal.
It's true. I mean, what can I say? It's mainstream news. It's Reuters. It's Associated Press. It's all over the place.
Okay, I didn't see it. You know, that's kind of what I'm interested in. Where did you, the Ron Paul thing about?
Oh, this Ron Paul thing right now is up at Raw Story, but you can just listen to his address. But yesterday I went over the Reuters article where it talked about the $106 billion to military operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. And what Paul did was read through the bill and explain that, hey, $660 million to Gaza, $555 million to Israel, some money to Egypt, Jordan, Mexico, and then almost $1 billion to the United Nations to further legitimize NATO forces.
Hold on just a minute.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yes, sir, Bermas.
Uh-oh.
Let me just explain something. We're talking about foreign aid. They're saying we're going to pay China, Mexico, and everybody else. We are going to pay our money so they can then buy carbon credits to then pay it back to the bankers. So we pay tax money to the private Federal Reserve. It takes it and it gives it to the countries to adopt the carbon credit system, the global tax, and then they pay the tax back to the bankers. Kind of like we give them the banker bailout money to quote to the banks, and they just keep it for themselves. I mean, this is on every front. The point I want to make is, and we're writing articles about this tomorrow at INFOWARRIOR.com, because separately the feds are taking over all the water.
We'll be back after this with Alex Jones's analysis, INFOWARS.com.
Together we rise, together we rise, together we rise, together we rise, together we rise. If you believe in redemption, coming to you from another dimension.
Live via Alex Jones talking about not only these SDR units and these NABs, these new reserve currencies, but how they're literally funding internationalism through these war bills of $108 billion. Oh, he's shutting down Guantanamo Bay, but he can't find the budget in the $108 bill we just passed.
Now, all they're doing is moving them to camps being built in the United States. That's admitted. But right now, folks, they're moving on every front. This is the big kahuna. They're bringing in the world government right now. So it is happening. And just on every issue, whether it's the global carbon tax, the takeover of health care, the Federal Reserve being given unlimited power, the federal government announcing they control all water in the U.S. from puddles and aquifers and all the land grabbing there. I mean, this is it.
Bulldozing U.S. cities. Bulldozing U.S. cities. We're not going to, home the homeless. We're not going to clothe the naked or feed the hungry. We're going to bulldoze cities, create FEMA camps, and have people come beg to be taken care of by their lords in the government.
You can't make this stuff up. But anyways, go back to the calls, Bermas. I was just running in here obnoxiously.
All right, Jones. God bless. Zach, what's your take? Let me just read this. China suggested in March that the International Monetary Fund's special drawing rights, or SDRs, could play a role as a future reserve currency. That's kind of a lie because it already is a current reserve currency, which would lessen the reliance on the U.S. dollar as the world's top reserve unit. They're already in the process of doing that. They're not going to wait on it. It's actually going to happen. It's happening. The SDR is an international reserve asset allocated to IMF member countries with its exchange rate determined by a basket of currencies. See, a basket of currencies. More internationalism.